Hello YouTube viewers, thank you for stopping by the channel. For today's video I'm looking at a bunch of Frogger games for the Commodore 64. Normally I try to keep videos to one per game, but honestly, talking about Frogger doesn't seem like it's going to make a very interesting and long video, and there are so many multiple Frogger games for the system, I figured looking at them together is a good idea, so here we are. First we take a look at Frogger 64, published by Interceptor Micro in 1983. This is a UK release that I'm guessing didn't make it stateside back in the day. We're talking pre-internet, of course, although there was a modem and there were bulletin boards you could dial into. I don't know, maybe you could have transferred it that way, who knows, but I think, in general, UK games probably didn't make it to many US stores. So we have a Frogger game for the Commodore. It's one screen of Froggy goodness doing what Frogger does best, which is jump past cars to get to the river section, and then you jump on the back of logs, turtles, and hopefully alligators to get to your home base at the top of the screen. It's great and all, but like every other Frogger game I've ever encountered, it doesn't address the most basic question people have over this game, which is, why can this frog not swim? Very strange. But it's certainly Frogger, and in this one, I think the thing that stood out first was my disappointment at the lack of music. Even the Atari 2600 had a startup jingle. There is this weird, faint sort of droning pattern that starts on the second level, but I honestly missed it for a while. It's this really faint sort of sounding drone is the best way I can describe it, but I don't know if it's an audio setting or what. It's just, I guess maybe the levels could be off, possible, but I kind of really expected a more focused jingle. The second thing that caught my eye with this one were the choices of colors. Ugh, what a rough palette. Pinkish purple walkways, they're painful to look at. Was finding a shade of gray that difficult? I know the Commodore 64 only had 16 colors to choose from, and there were some shades of gray, but I know there are limits to what the system can offer, but I have seen some great games on the system that didn't seem to struggle with colors like this. Those are my thoughts anyway. The controls for the game, this one is sluggish, it's just not responsive. It feels lethargic, and I find myself getting squished a lot. I'm also bummed that there's no frog animation when you jump. Frog seems to be just a block of graphics that teleports through space one little jump at a time. There's just no movement displayed by the avatar. Jumping onto the back edge of turtles is also a bit of a problem. There's this little area that it looks like you should be able to jump on it and stand, but you can't. And you also can't jump anywhere on the back of the pink alligators that start showing up on the second level. In other versions you can jump on alligators, just not into their mouths. Frogger 64, it does fulfill the basic Frogger behaviors, but it's just not a go-to version for me. Maybe I would have appreciated it more back in the day. The next game is Frogger, published by Sierra Online back in 1983. This one definitely has music. The load screen plays some version of Yankee Doodle Dandy, which I'm okay with. And it also seems to morph into other songs, so it's a pretty lengthy loop. Which is great, because it doesn't really drill into you over time. It's not maddening. Unfortunately, it takes the place of all the other sound effects that could be in the game, but I still like it. Personally, I'm happy to hear music in any capacity, and the design of this one is pretty solid. The water is blue, the vehicles look decent, it's not bad. Logs look like logs. We have a solid color scheme, and nothing really seems out of place. Your frog, unfortunately, is just a boring white with no detail. You do get a movement animation as you run around, and it actually handles pretty good. I find myself being able to dodge obstacles pretty well, and I can get around okay, which is the whole point of Frogger. You can jump on the backs of alligators with this one, just stay away from their jaws. There's also this little head that pops up out of the water from time to time. I didn't remember that one originally from the earlier versions, but I'm starting to remember it now. I think it's supposed to be an otter or an eel. I'm not sure. It seems like it would be an otter or an eel. This one is also nice to let you set keyboard keys to use as directionals, and you can play with the keyboard or controller, and they both work well. You can also set this to a fast or slow mode, which is super nice. Faster mode definitely picks up on difficulty. This one is pretty great overall. The third game is some random Frogger clone from a gentleman named Carl. It's an unofficial game, it seems, and I loaded and poked around with this one for a bit to see what it was all about. It's kind of one of the fun things about having this particular system. There are thousands upon thousands of games out there just available to plug in and explore. In this game, your frog is always running in auto mode, so if you push up and hold it, you're going to keep moving, and for me, it doesn't usually equate to a successful run. This one is not easy to control. Also, when you move side to side, you get this odd little squishy movement animation, and when that happens, you can see the rest of the screen slowing down a little bit. There also aren't a lot of movement speed variations between the different obstacle tiers. That's one of the things I think the better versions of Frogger have. Different movement tiers have different speeds. I think this one is a bit rudimentary for my liking. With the exception of the logs, every obstacle is also a solid color with no detail. The river is also designed in a standard top-down view, while the street view, all the vehicles have been designed on their sides, instead of having four wheels down on the pavement. I can't say I've seen a lot of Frogger games handle it this way. Also at the top there's only space for 4 frogs, and I think 5 is more common. There's also no music that I can find, and there isn't really a lot of variety to the sound effects. For a clone though, it gets the job done. The next Frogger is a cartridge version published by Parker Brothers in 1983, and it has music that plays at the start of a level and at the end of a level, and there are sound effects in between. It's pretty much like the other Parker Brother Frogger games I've played, specifically for the Atari 2600. It handles really well, and they're decent colors and graphics. We get a frog animation that looks pretty good when you jump, and the different obstacle tiers move at various speeds, and you can also play this one 2-player and set to fast or slow modes. I have to say this one is pretty great overall. Parker Brothers did this one right, and they did it on multiple systems, it seems. I found another game worth talking about. It's called Froggy Goes Splat. Yes, it's not called Frogger, but it doesn't mean that it isn't. I think by looking at this one you can see a definite Frogger influence. There's some solid intro screen music, and you get a neat looking little frog. There are definitely some differences in the game though. First, there's no river section, just 2 road sections. You can also hold the joystick in any one direction to keep jumping. You're trying to get to the top of the screen, and then trying to get back down again, so you're always going to be going back and forth. Also, this is the first one I can recall where you don't jump in perfect increments. One jump forward is not enough to get you past the row of objects. That's very different than the other games. In most Froggers, you jump once, and that advances you completely into the oncoming path. And the next jump takes you completely out of that path and onto the next one. Here it's going to take multiple jumps to get you through. Also, when you die, instead of a skull and crossbones, you get this little tombstone. I kind of like that better. Also, these don't exactly look like cars. I'm not sure if they're supposed to be. Frogger 93 is a Frogger game released in 1993, published by C.P. Varig. The intro screen is relatively plain, but it has this killer Commodore 64 synth music. It's great. There's no music during the game though, just game sounds, but this synth track was awesome. The game is of course Frogger, and in some ways they kicked it up a notch. You have to get 6 frogs to the top of the screen, instead of only 5. The graphics are pretty detailed, or patterned really, and there are no oddball colors mixed in that look sort of strange, which is nice. The obstacle tiers are limited in their speeds. It looks like there are basically 2 speeds of things moving back and forth. And as far as you go, your avatar has really good movement animation, and it controls really well. It does have an auto movement mode, so holding your direction will get you moving pretty fast, so you gotta be careful. I think my biggest problem with this particular game is just figuring out how the turtles operate. They love to dive underwater frequently. They do it fast. This isn't an easy version of Frogger, but it is smooth, and it is solid overall. It's kind of what I'd expect near the tail end of any system, actually. This was 1993, and the Commodore was going to be discontinued the following year. End-of-life cycle games tended to have some pretty polished stuff compared to the stuff that was released at the start of the system. I know that's a generality, and I'm sure you can find evidence to the contrary, but after people have had the opportunity to program for any given system for a long time, they tend to get good at it, and they tend to learn how to leverage the strengths of the environment. I also found a hack of a Frogger game called Frogs in Space. This appears to be a hack of the Frogger 64 game specifically, and I say this because I've been staring at Frogger games for the past week, and I noticed the frog sprite used in this game is the exact same one used in the Frogger 64 game. Also, the frog image after you land your frog into its home spot, it's the same. They just changed up the cars here with spaceships, and I'm fine with that. That might not make sense logically, but hey, they look pretty good. The ships do run a little glitchy on my system, but overall with the design I'm fine with it. This one's okay, although you have to be really precise with your jump at the end when you're getting into a home spot. It's not very forgiving in that capacity. But it does let you choose the difficulty level from the start, which is always nice. Well, that's all the Froggers I've managed to look at this week for the Commodore 64. I do find it interesting to see so many variants of one game on any particular system, and I'm sure there are still plenty that I missed. That's it for today though, so thanks for taking the time to watch and hope to see you on another video.